Namaste. We are beginning our program shortly. I request everyone to kindly be seated. Before we begin the event, there are a few housekeeping rules to be kept in mind which I would like to highlight. For the duration of the event, I request everyone to keep their mobile phones in silent mode. If you have not registered for the event, please do so at the registration desk right outside the hall. In case of emergencies, you can find the exit towards the right side of the room. The bio break rooms are located outside the hall towards the right-hand side of the registration desk. We will be having a short break after the second panel discussion at 12 p.m. Thank you. Now, on to the event on behalf of International Food Policy Research Institute, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and Institute for Integrated Development Studies, I, S.Asia, welcome you for the second day of launch of South Asia launch of IFPRI Global Food Policy Report 2023 and panel discussion on rethinking food crisis responses. I will be serving as your host for the rest of the day. We now proceed to the last two panel discussions that have been crafted for you. Our first panel discussion for today is on gender, promoting equality in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Without further ado, I invite to the stage our chair for the session, Dr. Dushni Virakun. Dr. Virakun is the Executive Director of the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka and the head of its macroeconomics policy research. She has written and published widely on macroeconomics policy, regional trade integration, and international economics. She has experience as a director on the boards of corporate and academic entities, including as an independent non-executive director at the Nations Trust Bank and Cargill's Bank, and as a director of the Center for Policy Analysis and Gamani Korea Foundation, the Social Policy Analysis and Research Center of the University of Colombo, and advisory board of the Center for the Development, Economics and Sustainability, Monash University, Australia. Next, I invite our esteemed panelist, Dr. Manohara Kharka. Dr. Kharka is the country representative for Nepal at the International Water Management Institute. Her areas of expertise include natural water resource management, development cooperation, and feminist political ecology research in water, forestry, climate change, rangelands, and agriculture development. She was the NRM portfolio manager and social gender equality and social inclusion advisor at the Embassy of Switzerland in Nepal. Her areas of expertise include natural resource management, rural livelihoods, development cooperation, program management, and more. I would now like to invite Dr. Ranjita Pushkar, leading the research program on gender and livelihoods at the International Rice Research Institute and IRRI's representative to India. Her work focuses on general knowledge, learning and evidence that can translate into technical and institutional innovation and more equitable outcomes for women and other vulnerable social groups engaged in agriculture. She also leads the evidence module in the CGIAR gender platform. Lastly, I would like to invite Dr. Hina Nazli, who will be joining us virtually. Dr. Nazli is an independent economics researcher with 30 years of professional experience conducting and managing policy-oriented research and large-scale household surveys. Her research is focused on poverty analysis, food security, health and nutrition, and gender analysis, and she specializes in examining economic impact of an intervention using econometric techniques. Prior to freelance work, Dr. Nazil worked as a research fellow at the Pakistan Strategy Support Program of IFPRI, social research analyst at Innovative Development Strategies, and short-term consultant at the World Bank. Over to you, Dr. Dushni. The panel is yours for 1 hour.
Thank you very much. I'm going to moderate this panel from the chair instead of going to the podium. Let me also welcome you to this session on promoting equality in fragile and conflict-affected settings that is looking at gender disparities and inequities, and I think it was touched on in almost all of the panels yesterday, the unfortunate reality that women and girls across the world face continuing challenges every day on harassment, discrimination, violence, etc., and that these dimensions of inequality tend to be exacerbated or worsen under conflict affected settings. So the IFPRI report, I went through that chapter on gender disparities. I think they've done a wonderful job of collecting evidence from various crisis settings around the world and setting out some clear policy recommendations or action points for policymakers to pursue in terms of better collection of disaggregated data, ways and means in which digital solutions can be tested to bridge these gender gaps, as well as ways and means in which better targeting on monitoring of gender outcomes should be done. And clearly one of the most important is also ways of improving the role of women in leadership. So we have a wonderful panel here to take up some of the issues that the IFPRI report has highlighted, bringing their own points of view or gaps that they have identified which need to be taken up. I noticed that this panel is entirely made up of women, which is somewhat of a unusual outcome for me as a macroeconomist. I normally tend to be the only female in a male-dominated panel. I think a gentle nudge also to the organizers to have a more representative panel, because it would also be interesting to hear on these issues on gender from not only women, but also from our male colleagues as well. So a gentle reminder to our panelists that each one of them has 10 minutes. I will sum up after the question and answer at the end of the session. So let me start in the order in which the program has set out and invite Dr. Manohara Kadpa to make the first intervention.
Thank you, Chair, Dr. Dushni. Good morning and namaste everyone. Yeah, very much pleased to present some sort of experience of International Water Management Institute around how to make food system very much resilient and also inclusive. So my focus of talk would be basically water. Water solution is a key to achieve food security in a sustainable and inclusive way. So, yes, IFPRI is a research for development organization. We do research around water for food system, ecosystem, resilience, building, water for equality, promotion, also growth and inclusion. Today's talk is around our work on the water food ecosystem, role of water for food system and inclusion. Yes, since yesterday we are talking about no more needed about Nepal. It's really fragile country, highly vulnerable, also risks to different risks that globally is ranked. We are very much behind. It's a lot of things to do. Yeah, in terms of gender, it's global gender parity, Nepal also very much far behind. More than 70% of Nepal farmers rely on rain-fed agriculture, don't have irrigation all the year. Most of the women, 70% of women work are the producer who produce the food for us and also our children and family. So impact of natural disaster or climate-induced disaster are very much gender unequal. From a gender point of view, Nepal, annually 900 people die every year, because of disaster. women in their role, very much multiple livelihood role in a subsistence agriculture livelihood, bear the brunt of very much the disaster, many form of disaster, including landslide, flood, and different side. And I was part of also earthquake assessment. In that assessment, we looked at gender livelihood impact. More than women were affected than men, and also 55% men, also women died during the earthquake. Same way, the COVID lockdown, mostly women and children have suffered. I don't need to go. But having said that, there are gender unequal impact of the disaster we need to look at. Talking about the gender and social inclusion issue of food system in Nepal, as I said, for 70% of farm machine user and agriculture produce are women. They also do sell the vegetable and little product. Sorry, and then it is the when you come to the decision making, is the women do not have sufficient decision making role, power in dealing with the agriculture market and value chain, and same way the irrigation and agriculture subsidy are not very much gender equitable also. In that context, Nepal also moved from unitary system to federal system governance. It creates a lot of opportunity for inclusive water solution for producing more food and for sustained food security and nutrition security. Do you know that we have a 761 government at 3 levels, federal, province, and local level. Very much historically, more than 40% women are in local government who have much power on deciding where to focus on agricultural food system and also irrigation. So I don't go in detail, but it's really the decentralized, I would say the devolved food system in current context, federal system. There is a lot more to do through the research to capacity building of elected government and also peoples. Talking about now the water, Nepal, we said already Nepal rich in water resource, but when you talk about farmer access to water, always challenge. Less than 40% of cultivated land has year-round irrigation. There are a lot of things to do, the farmer year-round irrigation. So we did a lot of analysis in Western Tarai region last year. During COVID, more than 80% of the groundwater still are potential to extract sustainably for producing for agriculture. Same ways, Nepal is renowned in a community-based approach to food system, agriculture, and irrigation. More than 98,000 water user groups, forest user groups, and are really contributing to sustain. They are the one who sustain, manage challenge during the COVID also. So they have a lot of potential to organize. And more than 3 million women are really doing everyday farming. So how to make this our food system inclusive comes here in. So few example of what we are doing that also I'm part of as a social scientist on water resource management. We are very much working on how to enhance the sustainable use of groundwater for food production, including vegetable, as very much solar power is very much comes in, and we do a lot of social science. I don't focus here the biophysical side, but the social science, gender, social inclusion review, we are doing the South Asian, to what extent policy of water, energy, food, consider the gender, empowering women as a part of the irrigation development and agriculture development, provide the policy recommendation to the government of Nepal. Just example, we use the gender continuums ranging from policy analysis as a gender aware to gender aware and gender responsive, gender transformative. We did more than 52 policies that focus on agriculture development through the alternative energy, and we did analyze. It's really very sad that energy policy are not very much gender sensitive, while the agriculture policy are very much gender focused, very much proud to say, but how to implement, what the impact of gender study policy, agriculture development strategy of Nepal that really talk about gender is another research needed, but overall policy are gender aware, not much transformative. Transformative means that understanding barriers, systemic barrier that enhance, that challenge the woman, that restrict women to access the agriculture subsidy input. This kind of lens is very much important. So understanding policy development from power relation is very much important, and we looked at, we used the power relation approach in this understanding policy. Second solution is that, as I said, the 40% of farmer, 40% of cultivated land only has year-round irrigation. Having said that, still in the lowland there is much water, groundwater that can be sustainable harvest. But we focus on dry season irrigation during 9 months. It's a dry season, 8 months. How to enable tenant farmer, landless farmer, woman farmer to access this irrigation agricultural input so that they are able to farm. So we did. This is very much collective of farmer groups who don't have land, but that they do farm on the lease basis. So this is very much good example, but it needs the scaling with the local or national level or provincial level programming. Third solution is about the water conservation, how to use water efficiently for producing more food in the same piece of land. Sustainable intensification mixed farming system we are doing in Khotang and Surkhet. This is just a 6 regional program, 6 countries, but Nepal is part of it. We are really focusing on the socio-technical institutional dimension of agriculture production to build the resilience of our farming system with a targeted smallholder, migrant farmer, women-headed household on this, the agriculture intervention research. Fourth is understanding how to save water, given the country is very much risk to the climate and other socioeconomic driver. So saving water is needed in future also, multiple use of water as a system that bring the water, that because of water, the producing different type of food and vegetable that really empower the farmer, women farmer especially, to generate little income and also vegetable. So this research we did a few years back. Now we are trying to discussing with the local government to promote this, to put this as a solution for targeted to the smallholder farmer, especially women farmer and tenant farmer. Fifth is water, energy, food ecosystem nexus. As you know, we are working in a situation where there is too much sectoral silo, agriculture sector and forest or environment, water is there. We are just initiated this one CGR research initiative in different basin. It has a lot of trade-off and synergy analysis. From a gender and governance research, we focus, I lead on this. One is understanding water energy nexus for a food system, with a focus on gender issues and also women empowerment on this resource management and also food system improvement. And second is the water, energy, food ecosystem governance that is really tackling the barrier that has with working with the sectoral mindset, silo mindset, how to bring water, irrigation, agriculture together, and also same with the biodiversity sector. So third is very much important, is the sector is a very gender skewed in terms of decision making, representation. You see hardly the women representation, although there are women engineers, so women forester, women agriculture scientists, but hardly space is occupied by men. So how to enable men and women as a leader for future dealing with the food crisis in a nexus way. So fourth is all about, it's not agriculture, but also part of the WAS is really the health is linked. How to enable the water supply system very much in the context of climate change, in the context of out-migration man, those left behind are the women and children, elderly, how to enable, how to understand this challenge in the context of these drivers. So we are doing very much integrated research here. We try to understand risks and vulnerability of the water source supplies, linking this to the people side of his gender and social vulnerability, and provide the policy recommendation and capacity building of the stakeholder. This is a water-induced disaster management we did in this East Rapti watershed Nepal. Is all about using the social science approach to look at the biophysical water resource, very much technical resource focus. We use the feminist research methodology to understand the vulnerability risks from 3 levels, natural root, natural region, and development region, and social region. So we very much integrated. Our approach of research is really understanding the issue of water, food system, ecosystem from a social science and biophysical, and gender and feminist lens is very much anchored. COVID response, we did a lot of, it was very challenging doing research during the lockdown. We did a lot of analysis of how water irrigation or irrigation can be a solution to boost the economy and also increase the food access of those people mostly impacted is migrant household women, and also we don't need to talk about impact who are impacted, but our focus here is to analyze thoroughly with the six framework of irrigation management. One is policy governance, gender, social inclusion, COVID, and how COVID impacted to population, irrigation supply chain, irrigated agriculture value chain, and public-private sector. So role of private sector is very much key. We just did very much multi-stakeholder-driven research, not only IMI, government, non-state actor, community, discuss about how to address this challenge, the COVID impact that Nepal faced. Yeah, just to conclude, I don't repeat very much all, but having said, my message is that in order to enhance food security, food system, or nutrition system, we should not forget water as a key dimension. So water is the key for resilience building of, especially the people impacted by climate change and other disasters. And my past recommendation is that inclusivity in water resource management and planning decision making. We should do this kind of the water management by focusing on people at the center of resource management. Second is that there are a lot of gaps, as I said, that very much climate change happening, federalization implementation going on. We have a deep-rooted systemic barrier on inclusion, exclusion, equality, and evidence, knowledge, management, and access around this inclusion indicator in the flood, drought monitoring needed to be included, and early warning system, integration of this indicator in early warning system, better understanding of role of women in food system governance. Not only women should not be considered as a producer, so they are very much 30% of enterprise run by women, very much progressing. We need to bring the woman in the whole value chain processes, and also governance of food. Third is improve water access and water technology. Technology is very matter. It's labor intensive, very much affordable. That helps people impact women farmer to cope and adapt to the situation. But technology, they also need a capacity building on technology. And then our analysis on solar irrigation subsidy are not targeted to the producer, real farmer. So we are lobbying through our research. We are doing supporting the Alternate Energy Promotion Center, how to make the subsidy policy and irrigation, or solar irrigation very much equitable and inclusive. Fourth is strengthen institution system for inclusive food system, all about recognizing gender relation between men and women, among men and women, acknowledging the inequalities needed in an institution level, not only the grassroots level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manohar. I think that was comprehensive laying out of all the main points on water-related issues and how they're impacting women and the policy responses that need to be implemented. Perhaps in the question and answer session, I think issue of why irrigation and agriculture subsidies on those incentives are not getting through to women needs to be sort of answered. I didn't find that coming out at the presentation. Let me now invite Dr. Ranjita Puskur to make the next presentation.
I also want to let the audience know that the Nepali translation is available on your respective tables for use. तपाईहरुको सहभागिताको लागि तपाईहरुको टेबलमा नेपाली ट्रान्सलेसनको लागि पनि राखिएको छ. Thank you.
Don't need the thanks. Good morning, everyone. Even though we don't have any men on the dais, I think there's quite a few in the audience, so which is great. It's also quite unusual for me when we go to workshops which are focused on gender or, or sessions that are on gender. it's usually just women sitting there. None of the men are there. It's become like gender research is about women, for women, by women, about women. So thanks for being here. And we would have loved to hear some men speaking, but next time. But yeah, first of all, thanks to IFPRI for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts on this topic at this very important event for the region. This quote kind of summarizes best for me the relationship between women and food systems. Food systems, food, makes them both vulnerable and powerful, victimized and empowered at the same time. And, looking at a lot of evidence that's been emerging, several speakers yesterday, almost everybody I thought, actually mentioned how women are amongst the most vulnerable to different kinds of crises and how their capacity to cope and thrive during and after these crises is very limited because of the structural barriers that they face. So drawing on some of the recent evidence from the food policy report, but also some brand new sort of evidence and publications that have come out, the status of women in agri-food systems by FAO, to which CGIAR contributed significantly, came out last month. The reducing inequalities by the high-level panel actually came out only last week. All of them talk about these triple crises that the world is facing and how women are most vulnerable. So drawing on some of that, if you look at the SWAFs, as we call it, the status of women in agri-food systems, that actually shows that in South Asia, 71% of women and 47% men work in agri-food systems. Basically, agri-food systems are more important for the livelihoods of women than men. But the women in this sector tend to be very poorly paid, part-time, and mostly in the informal sector. And as Yo said yesterday, we have relatively little evidence on the impacts of conflict on gender equality or women's vulnerability, but relatively a little more on COVID and climate change, the impacts of that on women. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that these crises are not coming to us one after another. We are facing multiple crises at the same time. Climate change is happening. And then you have conflicts on top of that, or you have COVID and conflict and climate change happening. So making the challenge, really, really complex and wicked to address. And it is creating a chronic stress for the most vulnerable, which includes women. And then what we have seen during COVID is also the increased care work burden on women. That's been quite widely documented, and the increasing gender-based violence, both outside and domestic violence because of all the lockdowns, et cetera. And this whole unpaid care work is something that we do have to pay attention to. And because it reduces the time available for these women to pursue other economic opportunities to enhance their incomes or increase their resilience. Just as a glimpse, data from India shows that 76% of the unpaid care work in households is done by women. Men, on an average, spend an hour and a half on care work, domestic work, while women spend 5 hours. The situation and the numbers are not very different in the other countries in the region. So this is something to, think about. And this is what happened as a result of COVID and the other crises. The insecurity, the food insecurity, the gap between men and women increased from 1.7% to 4.3%. And in the first year of COVID, while 22% of women lost their jobs in the off-farm segments, only 2% of men lost their jobs. So that's, again, something. And women continue to get only 82 cents to a dollar for every dollar that a man earns in this sector. So if we look at some of these, evidence, what's coming out of these crisis settings, and I'll go through this fairly quickly because I think almost every speaker yesterday mentioned a lot of these. Again, some people are more equal than others. Some women are more equal than other women. All women are not a homogeneous group. Some socioeconomic groups across men and women, but within women actually were more affected than others. And there have been multifarious impacts of these. Not sure if what I did wrong, but yeah, okay. Right. And women were already vulnerable, but then these crises have worsened their situation. We talked about increasing gender-based violence, and in the session on value chains yesterday, we heard how the emergency measures to curtail some of these crises, stopping the COVID infection from spreading, several emergency measures were taken that affected the input and output markets, disrupted the food supply chains, cost of inputs went up, labor became scarce, so was machine availability, and as a result, agricultural production and productivity was affected. Reducing incomes and cash available to these women also led to asset depletion. Evidence shows that when incomes go down, the first resort of rural households is to sell assets owned by women, like livestock and small jewelry and household items and so on. And as a result, the food and nutrition security was also negatively affected. We've seen increasing food prices, and we know that the poorest and the most vulnerable people actually spend 2/3 of their income on food. So if the incomes have gone down and the prices have increased, they hardly have anything left to spend on food. I mean, and evidence shows that while the world produces enough food to feed everybody, the entire population, but more than 3.1 billion people do not have access to diets that have essential nutrients. And 60% of these malnourished are women and girls. So it has all these impacts that we are talking about. But one thing that we do need to take cognizance of is women are not just victims. We've seen a number of cases and evidence where women actually showed how they are resilient and how they can be agents of change if given the necessary enabling conditions. And then this again, I mean, there was a famous figure from FAO in 2011 which talked about how if you reduce the gender gap in access to resources, productive resources, how productivity would go up. This is like the newest figures, 10 years from the 2011 one in the new SWAFS report, that the gender gap in farm productivity continues to persist. The difference between productivity, land productivity, on farms managed by men and women, farms of the same size, is still 24%. We didn't manage to make much dent on that one. But if we close this gender gap, we can actually increase the gross domestic product globally by $1 trillion, and we can reduce the food insecurity by 45 million people. And even if half of the small producers benefit from the development interventions which are focused on empowering women, it'll raise incomes of another 58 million people. I'd like to think that we can now stop justifying why we need to invest in women's empowerment or gender equality and start thinking about how we do it. There is enough evidence, business case as to why we need to do it, but the point is, how do we do that? If you look at the response measures, COVID and after, a lot of the fiscal measures were mostly gender neutral, and they focused on urban areas and very biased towards the formal sector. Women in agribusinesses in rural areas didn't get an awful lot of support. Social protection definitely helped. The direct cash transfers, safety nets, and the food assistance were immensely, immensely helpful. There were a few agricultural support measures, but very little known on how they benefited women in some of these value chains beyond the production. And then very few asset support measures were there. So as we are talking about policy responses, I think the important thing is to make sure we are intentional about this. I mean, much of the current policy and technical guidance in food and nutrition security arena is gender blind. If you look at this, 75% of policy documents in 68 countries recognize women's role and their challenges, but only 19% of those actually have policy goals explicitly related to gender or gender equality. So unless we are intentional, there's no way we are going to tackle any of these unless we have those goals and goals that are measurable. And yesterday, I think there was a lot of discussion around how we need to be looking at anticipatory action and building resilience rather than being reactive. And I think that's really key. And several of these new reports, and we all have been talking about how it's really important to go beyond the manifestations of this gender equality, the gender gaps, as we call it. Let's not try and fix them in the short term, but then forget what is actually leading to those gender inequalities, which is the gender norms, social and gender norms, the patriarchy. And this region, as all of us know, is quite notorious for that and hard to move on that front. So, but unless we do something about it, we are not going to make much progress. And this new HLPE report on inequality actually talks about recognition, representation, and redistribution as some of the main principles that we should be working towards. And then quickly talking about a few options. There is going to be a next crisis. We don't like it, we don't want it, but I don't think we have an option. I think it's going to come. So how can we be better prepared for that, especially looking at gender equality? Lot of talk, several people mentioned, especially the value chain session, we talked about market links and processing, value addition, technologies, input provision. How do we make sure these are all reaching women? We are focusing on crops and value chains where women engage in. Vegetables and fruits is one that women engage in. They are also important for nutrition, but they are also perishable. So, how do we protect their businesses and production from these losses? And then yesterday we did talk about provision of seeds and, maintaining livestock and so on quite a bit. Very, very important for women. Access to finance. Women still have limited access to formal financial resources. We have very few women-friendly financial products or risk management products, insurances, and so on. We need some products that work for women, collateral-free, because they don't own land. They can't mortgage, land to get those loans. Low-interest loans, which can take care of their income flows and consumption loans, etc. And then we keep talking about digital, innovations. Yes, they have a huge potential, but don't forget that we still have a significant gender gap in this region, gender digital divide in this region. And we've got to bridge that if we want these digital innovations to be helpful and benefit women. making, given the labor shortages, making machinery available to women when needed, and a lot of emphasis on early warning systems and climate information, but evidence shows that a lot of it is not usable by women. What information are we conveying? Is it good enough for them to use and make decisions locally? Something to think about. And then we talked about focusing on nutrition, sensitive agricultural value chains, protecting assets of women. Quite a bit of discussion since yesterday on data and evidence, but then we need gender disaggregated data. And it needs to go beyond just men and women. We need to look at other intersectional factors: age, caste, class, ethnicity, location, etc. That is very important for us to make any meaningful policies. We've talked about foresight and anticipatory actions. This is a wicked challenge. These are wicked challenges, as we said, multifarious, multifaceted problems. So you need multidimensional, multi-sectoral solutions. No silver bullets, no simple solutions are going to work. And then extension service is important. And then the last point that I want to make is about making women, the actors who can drive some of these transformations. Make women and their groups, collective action, groups of women are supposed to build their resilience quite significantly. How can we engage women to be a core part of the solution? They are leaders, they are innovators, they are farmers, they are value chain actors, they are consumers, they are caretakers. 50% of the population or more. Don't forget them, and let's have that principle in mind. Engage them in policy discussions and policy making. Nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjita, for taking a broad sweep on many issues. We'll come back to that if we have time in the question and answer, but I want to go straight on to our third and final presenter, Dr. Hina Nazir, who will be joining us online.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Shall I start?
Yes, please start. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And after listening to two speakers, I'm thinking that they gave me some ideas, but the disadvantage is that they spoke most of the things that I prepared. But I will present here Pakistan's case. So maybe my presentation will be a little different in this sense. So I will start by presenting Pakistan's situation, that what is happening in Pakistan and how gender disparities exist and persist. So first is that Pakistan has been facing different crises since last few decades, and this has resulted in an equal distribution of resources and power that generated disparities across provinces, across rural urban areas, and across gender. And high population growth resulted in a population with little or no education, with less skills, and with lesser access to productive resources. And that has generated widespread poverty and malnutrition. That has also gender and regional dimensions. And Pakistan has been facing several crises, among those debt management, energy crisis, water crisis. And this all is due to poor governance and economic mismanagement, corruption and weak enforcement of law. And this has resulted in the decay of institutional infrastructure. Pakistan has been facing several other disasters like earthquakes, floods, COVID, and then there is regional conflict, there is war on terror, and also political instability. This has resulted in increase in reliance on donors, and uh, there is very weak monitoring and evaluation system in the country. So, United States think tank Fund for Peace has calculated the Fragile State Index, and in 2023, Pakistan ranked 31 out of 179 countries. And this index includes several indicators related to cohesion, economic and political and social factors. And when all these factors are combined, then Pakistan ranked 31. And given the current situation, it is almost certain that Pakistan will be pushed upward. And among these top five countries are Congo, Syria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. So my next slides will focus mostly on pre-2020, where when most of the data is available and analysis is done, and that data highlights disparities across regions and gender. And some slides are about 2020 and onward, because this in this time period, data availability is very limited. National level data availability is very limited, and we cannot examine the impact of COVID-19 and also floods that Pakistan faced last year. And currently, Pakistan is facing high inflation and political instability. So the data before 2020 indicates high gender disparities in education, labor force, and earned income. For example, adult literacy rate among female is 49%, whereas for males it is 70%. And labor force participation rate, there you can see a large gap, where like female 21% participate in the labor force and male 78%. And the proportion of youth who are not in education, not in employment, or not in any training, 55% are female and 10% are male. And when we see health indicators, then women are suffering from malnutrition. A large majority is anemic. They are vitamin A deficient, zinc deficient, vitamin D deficient, and 38% women are overweight as well. And this is because they have limited dietary diversity. Most of the diet is consists of fats, carbohydrates, and sugars. The World Bank Atlas on Diabetes shows that Pakistan is on the top in the prevalence of diabetes. And this report also shows that hyperglycemia in pregnancy affected nearly 643,000 live births in 2021. And of course, maternal mortality is also very high. And this has translated into future generation, malnourished mothers and malnourished children. You can see that stunting, wasting, underweight, or other deficiency of micronutrients is very high among children. And here we can just imagine that current situation is bad, and given the high level of poverty and food insecurity, in future there is no chance that this situation will become better. And Pakistan has gone through, obviously, like whole world, pandemic COVID-19 and heavy rains and floods last year. And now it is political turmoil, and Pakistan is on the verge of default, fast depleting foreign exchange reserves, and inflation is also very high. Right now, it is in mid May, it was reported 38%, and that has surpassed Sri Lanka, that has, I think, 25%. So in natural disaster, COVID-19, very few national level data is not yet collected, but there are some studies, independent studies on area-specific studies that show that women face larger burden of housework, family care, homeschooling, and uh, also some girls dropout rate among girls there is also increased, and because they have to support their family. And also like other countries, small businesses are closed, and it has affected daily wage earners are also in formal sector where most of the females are working, and this has pushed a large number of households below poverty line. Severe poverty, food insecurity has increased from 10%, has increased to 10% from 3%. Very bad situation. And after that, people are still struggling to come out of COVID-19. Then last year, large-scale floods hit the country. 1/3 of the country was underwater, and floods had affected a large-scale damage. Buildings, bridges, highways, homes, they are affected, and standing crops were washed away, livestock were washed away, and many people were displaced. World Bank estimated that floods have pushed around 9 million people below poverty line. And the United Nations Population Fund estimated that around 650,000 pregnant women were directly affected by this disaster. And at the time of floods, nearly 73,000 women were about to give birth. And you can imagine that how painful was this for them. Some women were just sitting on the road, some women were in the tent, and some women were sitting on the top of their houses waiting for the assistance. And this was really disastrous. And also, some studies found violence against women and girls and dispute over the distribution of food. And some studies also found sexual exploitation and forced marriages in exchange of money to buy food for the rest of the family. Uh, when we see the collapse of the economy, like the current economic growth rate is only 0.29%. That economy is growing less than 1%. So there is a likely that unemployment will increase. And when this unemployment will increase, then this means that more people will go below poverty line, and their accessibility to food will reduce, and this will increase food insecurity. Inflation increased to 38%, and rural areas are badly hit. And if we see food inflation, it reached to 49%, and again rural areas are badly hit.
Dr. Nazli?
Price of wheat flour, that is staple, is increased by 117% during 1 year. And what will happen when price of wheat increases? That demand does not reduces, but it results in the substitution with health and education expenditure, and this may worsen already low human development indicator and also the gender disparity.
Dr. Nazli, just a kind reminder to please wrap up. 10 minutes is up.
I'm just one slide. So Pakistan has several legislative steps to stop gender-based violence and gender policy framework, but unfortunately, the implementation is very weak. Progress towards SDG 5 also shows improvement, but recent data is not available, so we cannot say what will happen after 2020. So way forward, the report, Global Food Policy Report, also suggests few things, and I will add some to them. Cash transfer program, Pakistan has Benazir income support program for last 15 years, and there are several studies available that examined the impact, and they found a positive impact. Employment opportunities for women through skill development and vocational training, and Benazir Income Support Program also provide this, and it also has positive impact. Then I would suggest that extension services can play a very important role for the females, because they can right now extension services are not, they do not reach to women, so they can play a very positive role. In addition, women's participation in political process will also be very important. And also there are two important institutions. One is the religious leaders and the other are lady health workers, who have access to every household. Like religious leaders are obeyed in every village, and if they ask someone to kill someone, then people will go and kill. So I would suggest that they should be trained to encourage people to send their daughters to school, and so that they give this in their Friday sermon. They should train men that how gender disparity can be removed or eliminated. And lady health workers, they play a very important role. They go house to house and they provide assistance to females, and they can play a very positive role in disseminating about malnutrition, and about nutritional practices and about education, and they can play a very positive role. So these two institutions can play a very positive role in
Dr.
eliminating gender
Nasli,
disparity.
I will have to ask you to wrap up. We are running out of
Yeah,
time.
this is my last point. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Do we have 5 minutes to wrap up? If I can open up to 2 questions very quickly to the panel, if there is anyone out there that wants to clarify or pose a question quickly. Questions, 2 questions. One, the lady in yellow and right at the back, and I will just have to stop at that. I'm sorry, we are running out of time. Quickly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunita from Nepal. My one this adding point, do we need to think about how to protect who are working for women and women in this journey? Innovation, and we are empowering the women, or we are talking about this, but the one case, now we are thinking about how to save who are on the journey already. Because after the COVID and after this crisis, the people, especially the women and the other people who work for deprived people, they are facing to sustain themselves also. So is there any things we are including in this policy? Thank you.
Very quickly, brief question. And you didn't. Yes, so can we just take it to the break time, please? Yes, right at the back.
Good morning, and thanks a lot for the session. There was one data point that ma'am had shared about 22% of the women lost their jobs versus 2% of men. If she could also explain if there is information on why that happened, why there's a disparity in that number.
Was that clear? We're not hearing the questions very clearly. Can we have it? Oh, yes. So I'm going to wrap up very quickly and hand back and not disturb the program. I think we've had 3 very different presentations, but the messages are very clear, and continuing from what was heard yesterday, that women are impacted disproportionately through crises, and today very clearly came out that in crisis settings, those impacts are accentuated and are much longer lasting. I come from Sri Lanka, a country that went through 3 decades of conflict. Interestingly, after a just before COVID, our data shows that policy interventions to bring or alleviate poverty among female-headed households worked, that there was hardly a difference between male and female-headed households in terms of the poverty outcomes. But now, 3 years on from the onset of COVID-19, suddenly that gap has opened up. Why? Because there is a large proportion of female-headed households in conflict-affected northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka that have fallen back into poverty. So what it tells us is that interventions that are targeted in conflict-affected settings can work, but they are not long-term solutions unless more comprehensive national-level policies are rolled out, because at the signs of the next crisis, conflict-affected female-headed households are at the front line of those who fall back into poverty. And I think this is a point that Ranjita also made in talking about the institutional policy setting. As an economist, I find that there is gender blindness in when governments roll out crisis responses. There is very little discussion on gender. Essentially, it is left to the NGOs or to development partners to take on that burden, but national policy setting, we talk about climate change impacts, we talk about the need to roll out social protection, but nowhere in that conversation does the need for specific gender-related assistance to be targeted by national government. So I think in a crisis setting, there are competing demands on governments, resources are limited, so addressing gender issues then becomes even that much harder. And even from our own experience is that when you are in a crisis setting, donors, NGOs come in, and once there seems to be some improvement, the next crisis in the other country grabs their attention and off they go. So unless policy on gender is institutionalized within our own governments, it just doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Again, I think the IFPRI report very correctly points to the lack of leadership of women. If we take parliamentary representation, Sri Lanka, gender equity in education outcomes has always been, women have performed better than men, and now our girls are performing better than boys, but at parliament, female representation is about 7%. So there is no leadership to drive these kinds of policies at the national level. So I'm going to stop at that and thank my very interesting panel for the insights that they brought in and the contributions to the discussion. And once more, I urge the organizers to ensure that we have a more representative panel when gender issues are taken up next, because we did miss hearing alternative voices on this very important issue. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank our esteemed panelists and chair for a very insightful discussion on gender promoting equality in fragile and conflict-affected settings, highlighting the severe impact of gender inequality in conflict and crisis settings. We now understand how vital it is to prioritize and fund gender targets to empower women and reduce harm from crisis and food system shocks. Thank you once again. I now request our esteemed panelists to kindly take the seat in the audience. We now have a final panel discussion before we break at 12:15 p.m. Without further ado, I invite to the stage our chair for the discussion on social protection, adaptive safety nets for crisis recovery, Honorable Dr. Swarnim Wagle. Dr. Wagle is a member of the Federal Parliament in Nepal and the former vice chair of the National Planning Commission of Nepal. As the head of the government's apex policy advisory body, Dr. Wagle guided the formulation of national development strategies, coordinated policy across the public sector, monitored large projects, led ministerial delegations on the international stage, and stirred organizational change. Next, I invite our esteemed panelist, Ms. Jyoti Pandey. Ms. Pandey is a senior social protection specialist at World Bank, Nepal. Her work includes supporting the implementation of bank-funded projects and conducting policy analysis to support the government in improving the lives of the poor and vulnerable. Ms. Pandey has worked on projects to promote equitable and inclusive access to civil registration and disaster relief, and to improve the delivery system, including transitioning paper to online civil registration and cash-based to electronic payments. I would now like to invite Dr. Kal Hirvonen, who will join us virtually. Dr. Hirvonen is a Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI in Development Strategies and Governance Unit. Through his research, he seeks to understand how sustainably improve nutrition and food security outcomes in low-income countries. His work sits at the intersection of development, health, and agricultural economics. Dr. Kal has done extensive research in areas of social protection, agriculture, nutrition linkages, food systems, value chain, and food markets. Most of Dr. Hirvonen's work is based on statistical analysis of primary data and from large-scale household surveys or randomized control trials. I would also like to invite Professor Shyamal Chaudhary, who will join us virtually. Professor Chaudhary is a professor at School of Economics, Faculty of Arts, Social Science at the University of Sydney. Prior to joining the University of Sydney, he worked for the International Food Policy Research Institute from 2003 to 2006 and at the World Bank from 2006 to 2007. His research program has been and continues to be shaped by the broad goal of trying to understand how development interventions influence households, particularly poor households, under the market imperfections. Lastly, I would like to invite Dr. Mehrab Bhakhtiar, who will also be joining us virtually today. Dr. Bhakhtiar is a research fellow at IFPRI. As acting country representative of IFPRI Bangladesh and deputy chief of party, he has helped lead IFPRI's policy engagements, research outreach, and the implementation of national and subnational surveys in the Bangladesh since 2019. Over to you, Honorable Dr. Wagle. The panel is yours for 1 hour, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, all distinguished panelists. This looks like a panel with the majority being abroad. It's a virtual panel. So let's get started. I need to wrap up by 1 thereabout. Sorry, at noon, because I have to rush to the parliament. So let's start with Ms. Jyoti Pandey, Senior Social Protection Specialist at the World Bank. And then we'll move in the order that is printed on the program.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. I will speak about what adaptive safety nets is, the status of adaptive safety nets in Nepal, and how that relates to food security. Social protection programs are typically designed to reduce poverty and vulnerability of households and individuals across the life cycle. And they include income transfers, skills training programs, investments in human capital, but they can also, social protection programs and systems can also promote household resilience prior to crisis and help deliver relief and recovery post-crisis, and therefore is relevant to our conversation today. Ex ante, social protection programs can promote household resilience by transferring income, skills that can help build assets, increase investments in human capitals, and therefore prepare households to better cope with shocks and crises. Ex post, the programs and systems can also be used to deliver relief and recovery. And using the systems that already exist, by scaling up existing programs, the delivery of relief and recovery can be faster, more efficient. And so essentially, adaptive social protection means mobilizing existing programs and systems to promote household resilience prior to disaster and deliver relief and recovery in a more efficient manner after crises. Why are we talking about adaptive safety nets? First, of course, because social protection programs can be used to promote household resilience. But the second, more important aspect in terms of delivery of relief and recovery is that if we use existing programs, the delivery of relief can be faster and more efficient. And here what I mean is if we use existing systems, and by delivery systems, I mean information systems, beneficiary databases, outreach and enrollment processes, payment systems, bank accounts, GRM, grievance redress systems. So instead of creating new systems after disasters, identifying, creating new beneficiary databases, new bank accounts, which we typically tend to do after disasters, if we rely on existing ones and build on that, we save time and resources. Second, typically social protection programs are targeted at the poor and vulnerable. So the program databases already have the list of poor, which are normally the ones which are more affected during disasters. So if we can ensure those households receive relief and recovery, we ensure inclusion of the most vulnerable. And from our own experience with the 2015 earthquake in Nepal, there were studies that showed single women and Dalit households tended to be left out. So if we use the beneficiary database which target these populations, we would make sure that these communities and individuals are included. And third aspect of sort of delivery and relief and recovery post-disasters is that using the same social protection tools and instruments, we can deliver livelihoods that are impacted by shocks. So all social protection is not necessarily adaptive if they don't have certain features. What do we need for social protection programs and systems to be adaptive? There are three building blocks that we talk about. One is information. The information systems have to be adaptive. Second is adaptive programs. Third, finance. And then the institutional setup to actually make this happen. So under information, what we're talking about typically is integrated social registries, or at least beneficiary databases that are digitized, which would help identify beneficiaries of social protection programs in normal times, and identify the poorest and vulnerable that need to be targeted after disasters. Under information, we also talk about early warning systems, which should be linked to social protection programs, so the relief and recovery can be better planned and prepared for. Under adaptive programs, what we mean is social protection programs that are scalable by design. And scalable means programs that can expand as needed. And here we talk about two types of scalability, vertical and horizontal. Vertical means providing additional benefits to the same group of people that have receiving from before. Horizontal is adding additional beneficiaries to the program. And horizontal scaling up then requires identifying who those additional beneficiaries are, and that's where the social registry again comes into play. The third aspect is financing. For the programs to be able to be scaled up after crises, we need the financing pre-positioned and the fund flow mechanisms defined. Finally, for all this to happen, we need institutional coordination across a range of agencies, the social protection programs, ministries of finance, DRM agencies, the coordination mechanism with government leadership. Now coming to what social protection in Nepal looks like. I would say the social protection in Nepal is not yet adaptive, and I say yet because there are efforts underway to make it adaptive. When I say social protection, I'm referring to a portfolio of programs that includes social security allowances, which is the largest program in Nepal, which are categorical cash transfers to senior citizens, single women, persons with disability, children in certain Dalit households and in certain districts. The Prime Minister's Employment Program, which is a cash for work program targeted to the poor unemployed. There's a range of scholarships, midday meals, safe motherhood program, and a range of health subsidies. So if we look at these programs and the building blocks of adaptive SP, when we look at information systems, the beneficiary databases of the large programs are digitized in Nepal. However, there is no integrated database that connects all these databases together. So we don't have a database of households and their vulnerabilities identified. There's been progress in forecasting certain hazards, so in the early warning system, but impact-based forecasting is yet to be institutionalized, and forecasting of other hazards is still a work in progress. In terms of programs is, I think, where we face the biggest challenge in Nepal. The current programs are mostly categorical and they're not scalable. They have a fixed budget, they're targeted to fixed categories of people, and they're not able to expand to provide additional benefits or cover additional beneficiaries during crises. If we look at coverage of the program, they cover about 1/3 of the population, but if we look at the coverage of those in the bottom quintile, only about 55% are said to be covered based on the last mixed 2019 survey. And the other aspect, if you're talking about household resilience, programs don't adequately focus on economic inclusion in Nepal. In terms of finance, the Disaster Management Fund has been established in Nepal. The operating guidelines have been recently approved, but these funds are not explicitly linked to social protection programs scaling up during crises. Finally, in institutional coordination, we have a DRM agencies that is trying to coordinate these efforts. The government is drafting shock-responsive social protection guidelines, which I will talk a little more about in the next slide. But these need to be reflected in the social protection program guidelines as well. The other feature of sort of SP DRM conversation in Nepal is that recovery of livelihoods is largely missing from the conversation. When we talk about disaster response, it's often limited to sort of search and rescue and relief and reconstruction of housing that is damaged. The DRM legislation allows for a very broad definition of DRM, however, the conversation is often limited. And therefore, the impact on livelihoods caused by crisis is not measured at the household level and not responded to. And another point, particularly for Nepal, drought is a crisis in Nepal, but it's not really seen in the same light as flood or earthquakes or landslide, and therefore the response to drought is not really done at the same level. Now to come to the shock-responsive social protection guidelines that the government is drafting, and that is supposed to help address some of these issues. The policy framework is supposed to help institutionalize shock-responsive social protection and sort of create a framework for institutional collaboration. The proposed guidelines cover all types of shocks that have an impact on household welfare, irrespective of the nature of the shock. Natural disasters, economic shocks, and biological shocks as well, and therefore sort of crises in agriculture. The proposed guidelines talk about different types of assistance. As I said before, so far it's been limited to sort of immediate relief. In these guidelines, we want to talk about anticipatory assistance, which has been discussed in some of the sessions yesterday. Immediate relief, of course, but also add components of early recovery and rehabilitation of livelihoods. And these assistance would be based on damage and needs assessment, which would help identify the beneficiaries. As I said before, so far the damage has been limited to assessing damage of housing. Under this framework, we want to include sort of the demographic composition of the household, socioeconomic status, and damage to housing, as well as damage to crop, livestock, and—
1 minute.
Thank you, I'll wrap up. And the impact on, or the status of food security. The other aspect of these guidelines is this will define how the existing programs, particularly the two large ones, social security allowances and cash for work, will be mobilized to deliver these. And it also defines the role of local levels. My last slide, when we talk about food crisis, social protection programs have been used to respond to food crisis. The report also talks about the Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia, Hunger Safety Nets program in Kenya, which are both food crisis response program, are linked to drought monitoring and can scale up as needed. In Nepal, we had the Rural Community Infrastructure Works, a food cash for work program that started in the mid-90s. This was phased out when the Prime Minister's employment program was introduced. However, the Prime Minister's employment program is not designed as a scalable program and is not really linked to food security. It can be made to do so, which is a point I'd like to make. And the shock response to social protection guidelines, I think, will help enable that. And it would also need to establish coordination across various agencies, including Department of Hydromet, Agriculture, DRM agency, and the program itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Almost on time. Good. very good overview of what's going on in Nepal, and I like that distinction between slow and rapid disasters, eliciting different response mechanisms. So let's move on to Dr. Hervonen. You have 10 minutes.
Apologies. There. Okay. Can you see my slides now and hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here online and also in person. So I'm going to present on social protection adaptive safety nets for crisis recovery, which is chapter 5 in the Global Food Policy Report this year. So just a warning, there's a lot of similar content with the previous speaker, perhaps with a kind of more of a global view of how things are. But just to kind of take a step back, there are 3 types of social protection programs. So we have social safety net programs or social assistance programs that provide this kind of a non-contributory transfers to the poor and vulnerable. Then there are programs, social protection programs that are contributory in the sense that beneficiaries contribute to these programs, and when a shock occurs, they withdraw. They receive benefits from these programs, and these are social insurance programs. And then there are labor market programs such as unemployment insurance, wage subsidies, and trainings. And out of these, if we look at across low and middle income countries, social safety net programs reach a larger share of populations and can be argued to be more important for poverty reduction and other forms of social protection.
I don't think the sound is very clear.
Okay.
We can follow your slides, but is it
at
his end or is it at our end?
Okay.
It's on the other side. So maybe you can come closer to the screen or something. Let's try something differently.
Is this better now?
Slightly better, yeah.
And particularly Sub-Saharan Africa, there's been a rapid expansion of social assistance programs. So here we see that the number of programs measured in terms of the bars here, the number of new programs launched each year and measured in terms of the bars have increased rapidly over the last 20 years. There's been a lot of new programming going on. And if we look at by end of 2018, all Sub-Saharan African countries, for example, have a large-scale social safety net program in place. There's quite positive research evidence on social safety net programs. When these programs are carefully designed and implemented, they are found to improve food security, reduce chronic poverty, and build household assets and wealth. Evidence from cash transfer programs show that they can empower women and reduce the risk of intimate partner violence. And for example, evidence from India suggests that safety net programs can reduce the risk of local conflicts. So the large-scale public works program there's evidence on this. These programs reach a large number of people and large number of poor and vulnerable people, so therefore they're increasingly being used as a platform to address other policy objectives, for example, related to nutrition, education, gender, and climate change adaptation policies. But there are some issues that globally we need to work on. So one is that there's a low coverage among the poorest households and individuals. So on the left-hand side, we have a bar chart showing the share of poorest quintile covered by social protection programs. So, for example, in low income countries, only about 15% of the poorest 20% are covered by these social safety net programs. This share increases as we move to lower middle or upper middle income countries. We can also see that the role of other social protection programs, social insurance and labor markets their role in terms of coverage among the poorest is considerably lower. So again, emphasizing this point that the social safety net programs are currently reaching more poor people than the other programs. The bar chart on the right-hand side looks at this, just looking at the coverage among the extreme poor, those living under the international poverty line, and we see a similar picture emerging there. So the real question, or the main question today is what is the role of social protection during crisis? And this is an extremely relevant question in the context that we're living in. It seems that we're entering an era of increasing turbulence with climate change, COVID, and conflict occurring more frequently. So here is a graph showing the global trend in extreme weather events, droughts, and floodings. And we see that over the last couple of decades, these events are becoming more and more frequent, highlighting the need of kind of for this kind of adaptive safety net programming. So as the previous speaker mentioned, these programs can improve resilience ex ante, and then during crisis, they provide transfers that provide relief to the affected vulnerable households. And then in this chapter, we review the evidence on this, and we see that social protection programs do indeed protect during droughts, floods, and other natural disasters. And even the evidence during the pandemic is supporting this, that they provided support during the pandemic. There is also plenty of anecdotal evidence showing that even starting from the 2007 food price crisis, that countries and areas that had pre-existing social delivery systems were often more agile in delivering and targeting transfers than entirely new programs that were set up during the crisis. And this has led to this kind of increasing interest in establishing shock responsive or adaptive social protection programs that tend to expand during a crisis and contract afterwards. And we indeed discuss the experiences in Kenya and Ethiopia that have this capability of expanding, particularly horizontally, reaching more households during these droughts. But as the previous speaker also mentioned, this requires major investments. We need early warning systems, unified targeting systems to avoid duplication of benefits, and then we need appropriate financing instruments to make sure that the funding is indeed available when these risks materialize. Then when we start to think about kind of a global targeting, focusing on countries that may be more vulnerable, it's quite easy to start thinking this in the context of climate risk. So here we have a graph that looks really messy, but I will explain what's going on here. So if we look at the horizontal axis, we see a climate risk index where lower values indicate higher risks. So each of these dots is a country, and countries on the right-hand side of the graph are countries in relatively higher climate risk than other countries. Then on the vertical axis, we see social assistance coverage of the poorest quintile. So countries that are below this line are basically countries where social assistance currently fails to reach the poorest of the poor. So I want to highlight two areas here. First are countries that are in very high climate risk, and then also where the social assistance coverage is relatively low among the poorest people. So there, in terms of in South Asia, Pakistan falls in this area. Other countries that we know that are in high risk are here also are Haiti and Mozambique, that have been suffering quite a lot because of climate-related events recently. The other area here are countries that are in relatively high climate risk, but they have relatively better coverage among the poorest in terms of social assistance. And here, most of the other South Asian countries are in this area. So obviously, it's very difficult to address the climate risk aspect, but you can anticipate and try to address it by ramping up social assistance programming.
You have one more minute.
Yeah. So in terms of policy recommendations, in this chapter, we call for improving social protection coverage in the poorest countries, particularly among the poorest households, but also the pandemic and these recent price shocks highlight the vulnerabilities in urban areas. So also emphasis on coverage there as well. And then we call for a shift towards a more proactive approach to disasters by incorporating these shock responsive designs into existing programs. And I was very happy to see that in Nepal, this thinking is already on the way, and lots of things have been already addressed there. But these types of adjustments are not free, so we need to strengthen domestic revenue collection systems and explore new ways of financing social protection. And then the long-run goal of social assistance is, of course, that households exit poverty and exit long-term support. So here we need to develop graduation programs that are scalable and can be incorporated into existing safety net programs. So the existing graduation programs are extremely promising, but they seem to be very expensive. So we need to find perhaps versions that are scalable and also cost effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Herbonen. Some interesting points on risk financing, which we can turn to at the end. Let me now invite Professor Shyamal Chowdhury from the University of Sydney.
Okay, yeah, so good morning, everyone. Give me a second. My son is ringing my door. I need to attend that. Yeah, come in. I'm in a meeting. Sorry. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, I guess you can see my screen. Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So, thanks for the invitation. I hope I could be in Nepal because I'm talking from Canberra. I'm not in Sydney, and it's very cold here. It was -4 in the morning. Okay, so I can't see now. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I'm in the meeting. Sorry, again. Yeah, so I'll be starting with Dr. Hirovanen chapter. I was really impressed by his what he has done, the summary that he has provided on social safety net programs, and I thought I would be also able to. I learned quite a bit, and I'll be actually taking some of this inputs to my students, in fact, when I teach in the next semester. So he discussed a few things, especially how social safety net programs could be designed, what are the issues, what would be adaptive social safety net programs, and what kind of policies we can draw from there. Now, so my aim is to today, briefly, to talk about related two issues. The first one is the deepening and widening, what he called vertical expansion and horizontal expansion of the existing social safety net programs, so which are very, very relevant. The second issue that I'll be talking about is recurring shocks versus unexpected shocks. So when we talk about shocks, and vulnerability, so we need to make a distinction between these two, right? So we do see two kinds of shocks, right? So I did quite a bit of research in the northwestern part of Bangladesh, where during the lean season, just before the harvest, so every year people face the issue of income seasonality. So that's the recurring shocks, right? So we know that this is coming. So if we want to design something for this kind of shock, it is different compared to a shock of, let's say, COVID-19, right? So we need to make a distinction between how to deal with two different kinds of shocks. Also need to think about deepening versus widening. So one might think, okay, so deepening might be very, very useful. So just give the existing beneficiaries who know who are poor and give them more resources if there is a crisis, and that would be perhaps beneficial, right? That might not actually work. Okay? Widening could be even more and more difficult than in developing countries. Especially my experience in Bangladesh is what is going to drive the conversation today. So here is a research that is conducted with IFPRI colleagues. Bin Khaled was an RA at IFPRI. One of my colleagues from Deakin University, Malik, and Kalani from IFPRI, and Shahidul Rashid, also from IFPRI. Right. So think about a program that in Bangladesh, food for poor people, that was working extremely well. So if you look at the success rate, so more than 96% of the people, of the beneficiaries, were receiving food aid before the crisis. Okay. So if you look at March 2018 or April 2018, so they were doing extremely well in a country like Bangladesh with less than 5% leakage, right? Now, come COVID, March 2020, it was still okay. But once the pandemic started, the existing program, if we just look at what was happening, it significantly went down. So the leakage increased from 4% to 33%. Okay, so I'm not talking about deepening here. I'm just talking about the existing program, how vulnerable it could be due to a shock, an unexpected shock, right? The shock that I wanted to make a distinction between. Now, if you look at May 2020, so that was the deepening of the program. So increasing the program from March, April to May. Okay, so giving the existing beneficiaries more. Now here we see that missing has increased to 58%. So more than half of the people were not getting the rice anymore, right? So that's quite concerning, right? So this is not to say that deepening and widening of the existing programs should be discouraged. We just need to be careful. So in fact, what we found that if you start a new program, that's even disastrous. Okay? So here are two programs. One was a relief package introduced again during COVID by the government. It's a new program, and look at the success rate. So only 25% of the population, so those who are receiving FFP, received that benefit. So there was no exclusion. Simply, so they are the poorest people for sure, but only 25% of them received that newly designed program, right? Now, if you compare, again, a cash transfer, the same situation, only 5.2% received a new cash transfer program, okay? So the new programs are not necessarily did better than the existing programs. But again, we just need to be careful. So the main message, the existing program may not be resilient to unexpected shocks. Okay? Now, let's now focus on recurring versus unexpected shock. So recurring shocks, so we have a wealth of knowledge when it comes to researchers and policymakers, what to do, okay? And Dr. Hirvonen has summarized many successful case studies very, very well there. So challenges are mostly to do with resource allocation, which is basically a political decision. He also mentioned that many of the resources goes to humanitarian assistance, not to the vulnerable people, which is again a political decision. The global community as well as national governments need to make those decisions. We also know institutional weaknesses, that those are known, and addressing them requires, again, political will, including the previous session when the speakers were talking about putting women into leadership. For all those are political decisions, and we should definitely look at them. Now, when it comes to unexpected shocks, so one of the main issues that we think, or I think, is the information is very limited. And in some cases, it just doesn't exist. Okay? So there could be high likelihood of targeting errors, either due to public authorities possessing insufficient information about beneficiaries or change in beneficiary status. So I give you an example. So a few months ago, I took an Uber from Canberra Airport to my home. Okay? The person who was driving Uber, so they usually often talk a lot. And this guy, I discovered that he was before COVID, he was a successful entrepreneur with more than 40 people employed in his enterprise. So 40 people in Australia is pretty successful, right? So this guy was driving Uber at the time because he lost his business. He was in Western Australia. He lost his business due to COVID shock. So he fell to the crack, right? So even in a country like Australia, which has a very sophisticated targeted system, was not able to protect its businesses, right? All the businesses. So this is very challenging. And we know that so because I live in Australia, I know that many businesses that did not deserve to receive transfer received a lot of transfers. Huh? So again, targeting is not that easy to solve when it comes to unexpected crisis shocks, right? So there could be also low demand because beneficiaries do not know that there is an expansion of some programs, so eligibilities are often not known. And of course, in countries like developing countries like Nepal or Bangladesh, there could be bureaucratic and political corruption, right, in the process. Now, here is an information intervention that we conducted, again, with my colleagues, a few German colleagues, Hannah Schneider and Suter. And here, we again conducted a very early RCT in Bangladesh, very simple RCT with about 2,000 households, just giving information, okay? So how information could be very, very beneficial, okay? So we had two treatment groups, one that received only information about COVID and another that received information plus some money. So if you look at how information could be useful, the treatment effects on knowledge and attitude. So these are standardized effects. So it's like 0.44 of a standard deviation, right? So very large effect of information on knowledge and attitudes, right? We see very similar picture
you have a
when it
minute
comes
left.
to behavior.
Sorry,
how much?
1 minute left, yeah.
So I'll be quick. Right, so here again, there was large effect of information behavior. Similarly, very large effect of information effect on health outcomes as well. Okay, so just to summarize, going forward. So one thing that we should seriously think about so we need to go beyond this structured data and to think about unstructured, non-traditional way of collecting data when it comes to unexpected shock. So it could be, looking at chats, listening to different conversations, using social media data, and perhaps harnessing AI to design and target those poor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Our final presenter is Dr. Mehrab Bakhtiar. Over to you, sir.
Sorry, can I share the screen? I need to be made the co-host, please. Oh, great, thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you.
Please go ahead.
So thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with all these distinguished guests and panelists. Thanks very much for inviting me. So I'll take this opportunity to update my IFPRI colleagues as well as researchers and policymakers from South Asia about the food security situation of Bangladesh. So essentially, we have been following Bangladesh food securities during the duration the duration of the pandemic. So the baseline, the initial data was nationally representative rural households. This was collected by IFPRI. It's called the Bangladesh Integrated Housing Survey. This was in 2019, and we were able to follow these households over time. During the pandemic. So the first round was around 3 months after the pandemic started. And in 2021, we had 2 more rounds. And so this round that I'll be presenting some results on was collected in March and April of 2023, so this year. So the idea is that hopefully some of these results can inform social protection policies and how we think about it in Bangladesh. So this is I would say, like, this is the basic result on food insecurity. So in all 5 rounds of data, so before the pandemic started, as well as these 4 rounds after the pandemic started, we measured food insecurity by following the food insecurity experience scale that was developed by FAO. These questions asked whether the households had worried that it would not have enough food to eat over the last 30 days, if anyone had skipped meals because the household lacked money or other resources, if anyone in the household had been hungry but gone without eating, or had gone without food for an entire day. So a series of questions that asked more difficult, that portrayed a more difficult scenario over the last 30 days. And essentially, we have 2 data here. One is moderate or severe food insecurity, which is if the household had answered yes to at least 4 of the 8 questions. Some of the examples that I gave you. And any food insecurity is if any household had said yes to any of those 8 questions. So the first, I think the result that would be interesting is that moderate or severe food insecurity essentially tripled in the first few months of the pandemic. But interestingly, this went back to pre-pandemic levels within about a year of the pandemic starting. And it remained consistent even essentially until the Ukraine crisis started. So after the Ukraine crisis started, so this was after we didn't collect data for about one and a half year. So we see that moderate or severe food insecurity, after having gone back to pre-pandemic levels, actually goes up again by around 6 percentage points. So I think this is significant. And the second point is that any food insecurity or milder forms of food insecurity, and I'll show you the components in a bit, remains elevated the entire time. So, so before the pandemic, the milder form of food insecurity or any food insecurity was around a bit higher than 1/3 or a half of the sample. So this went back to almost universal within the 3 months. But the interesting point is that this had always remained high. And this was fueled by, there are a lot of numbers here. I'll just quickly tell you what's happening. Essentially, a lot of the households remained worried about not having enough food the entire time. But for the latest data that we collected a few months ago, we see that around half of the sample were unable to eat healthy or nutritious food. They reported that they had low dietary diversity. And many of these indicators increased significantly in this over the last, I would say, over the few months since the Ukraine crisis started. So challenging, I would say, and this is also backed up by the fact that food prices in Bangladesh have increased significantly. So why have people been unable to afford food in many of these cases? So income loss is almost universal. Almost all households report that they had lost income during the last 2.5 years. And in terms of strategies that were used that were related to income loss, 1/3 of the households sold assets, including productive assets. 1/4 of the households received government transfers. But more than 1/3 of the households report higher level of debt, and this is consistent across male and female respondents. Higher level of debt compared to pre-pandemic times. So that is also a hard reality, it seems. In terms of food inflation, more than 1/3 of the households report that they're paying double or more than double for food compared to the previous year. And 1/3 of the households, they're reporting that they're at least 50% more. So 2/3 of all households, they're saying that they're paying at least 50% or more compared to the previous year. So in terms of social protection programs, the literature on adverse shocks suggests that the capacity to take protective actions to cope with shocks can lessen the impacts of events, public responses such as social protection programs. Then there could also be private responses such as networks of family members, also domestically and internationally. I'll just give you a quick preview of some results that we found based on social protection program that also had nutrition behavior change communication attached to it. So essentially, this was a pilot cash transfer program in Bangladesh that took place from 2012 to 2014. So around 9 years ago, this was completed. This program was implemented by the World Food Program, and it was designed and evaluated by IFPRI. The TMRI, so this program was called TMRI. This provided either cash transfer or food transfers with or without a nutrition behavior change communication. So essentially, this nutrition behavior change communication, or BCC, entailed intensive weekly group-based nutrition training, home visits, and community meetings, which focused on infant and young child feeding, and encouraged home production of nutritious foods. So in terms of how to rear a cow, how to have home-based production of poultry, as well as homestead gardening. So these were heavily focused in those training. And that was also combined, as I mentioned, with cash transfers or food transfers. So we were able to track these households during the pandemic. And we found that, moderate to severe food insecurity actually was significantly lower for cash and behavior change and communication households. So cash plus BCC, these households were reporting significantly lower forms of moderate or severe food insecurity. And we find that this was primarily driven by the fact that many of these households, or most of these households, had a second earner, the women earner, who were given the BCC training, and they actually were involved in home-based production of food. So, these households were, consuming more eggs. These households were actually, as you can see here, they're consuming more eggs. They were actually consuming more milk and dairy. So in the initial months of the COVID, when there were problems with food accessibility, thank you, I'm almost done. These households were doing significantly better. So the whole idea of this is to say that, this kind of addition to a social protection program can actually have significant effect, even in the long duration after that program ended. And this also ties in with our another non-experimental research, where we find that initial receipt of social protection before COVID actually had significant effect, positive effect on incidence of food insecurity on households. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So a rich set of presentations, quick, nice insights from each. So let me open the floor. We'll take 2 to 3 questions. Gentleman in the Nepali cap, Dhaka topi.
Our chair, Dr. Shonim Wagle, her representation in the parliament. We are very much optimistic. And my question goes to Ms. Jyoti Pandey. And I congratulate you for your marvelous and very much comprehensive presentation. But the provision of social security fund part is missing on your presentation. That is made by the government. That's just only a remark. Thank you.
Here at the front.
I am Roman Karki from Nepal Agriculture Resource Council. I have a question for Ms. Jyoti. In Nepal, the government of Nepal is contributing the very significant amount in social security programs, and several economists and even the members of parliament have reiterated that in current economic growth and the perceived economic growth in the future, it is not sustainable. So you also have reiterated that government programs on social protection programs cannot be scalable at large. So how you perceive that the social security program should be prioritized and should be focused on to the people who are in need, rather than just a tool for gaining the pleasing the masses for the political will. I'm also hoping that the chair has some comments and views on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Here at the front. Okay, and then one more there.
Mira? Okay.
Please, yeah.
Sorry, my name is Devendra Gauchan. Well, I also have a small query to Ms. Jyoti Pandey. So you mentioned about shock responsive guidelines already being developed. So whether these guidelines have a criteria for targeting the most poor and vulnerable, because it's like many of our social safety net programs, cash transfer programs are blunt, doesn't target, so that very poorest and most vulnerable get benefit. Thank you.
At the back.
Hello.
Maybe one more from a female participant.
I'm David Basal. Actually, my question goes to Honorable Dr. Wagle, because he has worked already as a VC of NPC also. We see that government has allocated $137.73 billion for social security programs for this budget. And considering the challenges faced by the government in sustaining the current non-contributory social security programs, would it be more viable and equitable to explore alternative models such as contributory social security benefits and addressing the potential regressiveness of non-contributory social scheme at present? Thank you.
Thank you. We can take one more. The lady there, please. Just for some gender balance. Maushami ji, and then go ahead. Go ahead.
Just one question. In this whole safety net, what kind of role do you see of a private sector, and how we can, what role we can play, and especially when Mr. Bakhtar has said something about the poultry industry in Bangladesh, how they have brought change in this whole food system. Maybe if you can just highlight what kind of role the private sector played in this whole process. Thank you.
Okay, final.
Namaste, I'm Sunita from Agriculture, Private Entrepreneurship. What is the status of social security program for farmers? And can we think about a digitalized in the social security, especially in the private sector and agriculture area? Thank you.
You want a quick one? Very quick one, yeah. And then we'll close it.
Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. I have this small question with I think Dr. Chaudhary, he elaborated some sort of collaboration between researcher and policymakers. I would like to ask a kind of direct suggestion to me how this kind of collaboration is possible in Bangladesh. And other one to the Bakhtiyarji, who mentioned giving a graph showing the impact of what I understood. The impact of the Ukrainian problem was more, more serious than the conflict, than the COVID-19. Is that the correct thing? And if that is the thing, would you please give the explanation how the Ukrainian conflict was more serious than the COVID-19 situation for the food security?
Thank you very much. So let's start with Jyotiji. The first three questions on prioritizing social security, shock responsive guidelines, etc. So why don't we get started?
Thank you. So on the first question on including social security fund, the expenditures in Nepal on social protection are already very high. By the last report, the latest is from ILO 2021, the share of GDP on social protection is 4.9%. That is really high compared to all the other countries. So we have to expand the coverage of contributory schemes, including those through Social Security Fund, for the long-term fiscal sustainability of these schemes. So there's no question on that. How do we expand the coverage is an issue to be discussed.
On expanding social protection programs during disasters, here the funds would come from DRM funds, not necessarily social protection. So the government is already spending on disaster response. What we are trying to do through these shock responsive program is spending that same money more systematically and ensuring that it reaches the right people. So we're not necessarily talking about additional funds for scaling up, but using the funds that are already available in a better way. The question about criteria for targeting, in the shock responsive social protection guidelines that are being drafted, that is a key issue. And the needs assessment that would be done after disasters at the household level, we do want to make sure that food security is accounted for and the impact on livelihoods is accounted for and therefore responded to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe Dr. Bakhtiar can take the questions related to the private sector in social safety nets. She mentioned the issue of poultry, for example.
No, thank you very much. It's a very, very good question. I just want to clarify that the program that I was mentioning, that was a UN implemented program. So essentially, they what we found was that the training program, so a very strong training program that focuses on improving the production of nutritious food at the household level. So, for example, that focuses on, dairy cows, for example, rearing or poultry rearing. So we found that if there's a consistent training program, that actually helps, which actually means that a lot of households don't know about this. So there is information constraint. So in the age of information, that's still a big problem. I think explaining that properly and training them how to do it, I think that is very important. So this particular training program, it provided training for every week for about 2 years, so a very intensive program. That's why I think we see sustained effects even after 8 or 9 years for the households that had received the program. And the training was combined with the cash transfer, which meant that, so it wasn't just a vague training, but it was also, so they were provided the resources to act upon the training. So if they were, for example, they knew about livestock, so they bought the cow, and then they were able to actually grow it, and 1 cow became 2 cows. And so that kind of a positive cycle actually continued. So I think that is very important. So in terms of, I would say, private sector, I think Bangladesh has done quite well over the last 20, 30 years, when it comes to poultry, since poultry was specifically brought up. So poultry feed, poultry vaccines, these are very important inputs. And I think accessibility of this and maintaining quality of this is very important. Access to finance for farmers is definitely a very important thing. Bangladesh has still a long way to go to improve access to finance for smallholder farmers in particular. But I think interventions which improve both access to finance as well as access to moderate to high quality inputs for poultry farmers, I think those could be ways where the private sector could come in.
Thank you. Maybe the question for the professor is on this linkage between research and policy making. You might want to take that.
Sure. Thank you. So it's a very general kind of comment that I would make, that for any functional society, we need to have collaboration among different sectors, especially academia that can bring knowledge. That's what we're supposed to do, bring new knowledge. And then government should, and academia, as well as, policymakers and the private sector, they need to work together. So we have resources in various forms. In developing countries, often government do not go sometimes to the academia or to the researchers. We do see that lack of communication. That need to be actually, that should be somehow overcome, and collaboration should be the one that should be encouraged. So this is something I think rich countries do much better. So often they reach out to academia, to researchers, and that's what would be I think one of the ideal thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask the final question to Dr. Harvonen on if you would want to elaborate on your the risk financing mechanisms that you touched on. Anything that we can learn, something new. In infrastructure financing, we talk about debts, public debts that pay for themselves. right? So you may borrow heavily, but you invest very wisely in productive assets that create growth, that expand the tax base, and we're able to service those debts over a horizon. Is there a parallel that we can look for in the social protection in the realm?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so so governments can strengthen their own domestic revenue collection systems and get tax funds then to finance these types of programs. But in order to have good domestic revenue collection systems, you need to invest in the tax authorities, but you will also eventually into the private sector that is functional and is growing, so that there is something to tax from. But an interesting example on how this risk financing scheme works in the context of Kenya, they have a very innovative way of thinking about the budgeting for this the program that was mentioned here, the hunger program. So they have calculated first the caseload in normal years without a drought. Then they have calculated the risk of a drought occurring in each year, and then they've attached the number of how many households should be included in the program during those droughts. So they've calculated the budgets taking into account these probabilities and risks related to droughts, and that's how they are able to then scale it up, because they have prepared funding wise for these risks. So that's all I have on this very interesting question. I need to think about more. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think I thank all the presenters and folks from the audience for asking interesting questions. I won't dare summarize this brief but interesting session, but let me just touch on a few points that struck me. On Jyoti's presentation, I think adaptive social protection, nice concept. She highlighted the different components of what makes social protection architecture adaptive. As a policymaker and a new MP, the concern for me is one can have social protection regimes that are adaptive, rigorous, very generous as well, which we are in Nepal. How do we make it viable, right? I think this was a question that was asked of me as well. So this is the challenge. He mentioned 137 billion. Actually, the correct figure is 158 billion, I think. That was the number that the finance minister announced. That's just social assistance. If you add other programs, social insurance, labor market programs, I think that goes up by quite a bit. 8 years ago, I used to be quite proud. Oh, Nepal is a very generous welfare state for a country at its level of income, 4.9% of GDP, etc. But for how long can we sustain this, right? And how do we pivot payments? And politically, it's suicidal for politicians to take away grants or handouts that people feel entitled to. So how do you pivot it to other measures that we need to work on? Health insurance, for example. So this is an area that we need to work quite a bit on, and I hope the World Bank is giving a lot of thought to these issues. Dr. Harvonen's on financing, this very exact conundrum. I mean, expanding revenue is an option, but you can expand revenue, you can plug all the leakages, etc. But there are trade-offs, right? Should you be using that extra additional resource to augment social protection schemes or fund critical infrastructure? So it's not so much the question of raising revenue that's an issue. In Nepal, we actually raise quite a bit of revenue compared to our South Asian peers. Pakistan is at 8 or 9%. Sri Lanka, I think the last I saw was similar level, 7 or 8% of GDP. We're at 21% of GDP, right? The base is not sustainable. It's all remittance-driven, import-propelled, and all that. But as a resource envelope, it's there. But it has multiple trade-offs, multiple uses, competing use that money can go into. So the challenge for us is how do we generate, make it contributionary, etc. These stuff should pay for themselves. That's the challenge. And anybody who has a bright idea on this score, I want to listen to those bright ideas? Where have these been applied in other countries? These things have to be self-sustaining to a large degree, and then the state comes in to fill that gap, because at the end of the day, we are pursuing an equitable mode of development, et cetera, right? So that's the policy conundrum. Just getting more money on the table is probably not enough. So those interesting mechanisms we're all looking for. Professor Chaudhary highlighted some interesting issues. Again, policy makers face this dilemma. I like that distinction between recurring shocks and idiosyncratic shocks, which he called unexpected shocks. At the time of COVID, we didn't imagine the government to be making money or profiting of our misery during a time like COVID, but it did. Not just in Nepal, but many other countries, right? So this information, the role of information, juxtaposed with episodes of unexpected shocks, that I thought was quite interesting. And then he highlighted this point about how unstructured data can be utilized to redress these conventional informational asymmetries when it comes to idiosyncratic shocks. I think that's an interesting point. In the aftermath of the 2015 earthquake in Nepal, we tracked mobile data, right, to get a glimpse of people's mobility. Where are people fleeing from where and all that. So that kind of real-time, unconventional sources of data, I think, should increasingly be mainstreamed into policymaking. Dr. Bakhtiar's, I liked those lessons from those experimental RCT results that you presented on Bangladesh. What struck me was 72.2% of Bangladeshis facing any form of food insecurity. I don't know if it is just a definitional issue or it's a substantive concern when it comes to, because we thought, the entire NGO success in Bangladesh, taking care of these intense deprivations, as well as the government's more recent economic success. So the numbers that you highlight is quite worrying, in my opinion. And also the government transfers were quite limited, right? 28%, whereas most of the people were relying on personal borrowing. So some, again, lessons for policymakers, and a puzzle to answer that, all this razzle-dazzle at the top, is it really trickling down? I think that's a question to be answered. So thank you so much. Very rich set of presentations. And I think we'll close with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank our esteemed panelists and chair for a very insightful discussion. Social protection programs have indeed become essential to tackle poverty, food insecurity, and lack of nutrition in low and middle income nations. It makes it critical for social protection programs like safety nets program to exist and reduce vulnerable to build resilience. Thank you once again. I now request our esteemed panelists to take their seat in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now be breaking for a short 5 minutes break. I will see you again at 12:15 p.m. for our concluding session. Thank you. Please take your coffee for, you can please bring your coffee here for your ease. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I request you to please take your tea or coffee and please come inside. It's just a 5 minutes break. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will be moving towards the concluding session. Without further ado, I invite to the stage our chair, Dr. Pramod K. Joshi, President, Agricultural Economics Research Association, India, and also served as the chairman of the SARC Agricultural Centers Governing Board in Dhaka, Bangladesh from 2006 to 2008. Next, I would like to invite Professor Jo Swennen. Mr. Swennen is the Managing Director, Systems Transformation, CGIAR, Member, Advisory Committee on Voluntary Foreign Aid, USAID co-chair of the Think 20 Tank Force on Food Security, stopping here in interest of time while listening his rank and achievements. Beyond all this, one of his unique and interesting aspect of Professor Swennen, for all those who are in love with the spirits, he is one of the finest researchers working on wine economics. I now would like to invite Mr. Jamaluddin Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed is the director of SARC Secretariat, and he looks after the Agriculture, Rural Development, and SARC Development Fund. He is a career diplomat who has previously served as Director Americas of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of Bangladesh and the Director of the Foreign Minister's Office. He also served in Bangladesh Permanent Mission to the United Nations, New York, from 2012 to 2015 as First Secretary, and at the Bangladesh High Commission in New Delhi as Counselor from 2015 to 2019. I would also like to invite Mr. Jason Sook, Director of the Economic Growth Office of USAID Nepal, onto the stage. Mr. Sook joined USAID Nepal in August 2021. His career has focused on balancing economic prosperity with environmental sustainability. Mr. Sook prioritizes partnerships with government and private sector to achieve development impacts for women, youth, and marginalized people. In Nepal, he leads a portfolio that strengthens market system for agriculture, improves the country's trade and competitiveness, and advances locally led development in marginalized communities. I would also like to invite Mr. Gyancham Kharka. Mr. Kharka is a journalist and a published writer who completed his Master of Laws focused in international human rights law from University of Leeds. He currently works as a senior sub-editor for Kantipur Media Group, where he covers Nepal's foreign affairs and human rights. Lastly, I would like to invite Dr. Mamta Pradhan for the vote of thanks. Dr. Pradhan is a research coordinator at IFPRI-South. She is a scholar in researching social protection programs. Her work portfolio involves large-scale multi-country and multi-stakeholder projects in South Asia region. She has also been a part of developing an integrated framework for trade, environment, and food security in the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. She also researches institutional solutions for smallholder agriculture in the form of farmer organizations in Nepal and some Asian countries. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Joshi. You have 1 hour.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So after very rich deliberation and having lots of information on the global food policy report, response to the crisis, food crisis, we are coming to the closing session, a very important session. We have a very distinguished special guest or panelist who will be giving their feedback and remarks about this important panel discussion. So first I would like to invite our special guest, Mr. Jamaluddin Ahmed, Director, Agriculture, Rural Development, and SARC Development Fund. Over to you.
Good afternoon to everybody. We are almost at the business end of this event, and personally, I don't want to prolong conclusion of that event. I just want to thank you all participants. I want to thank you twice, actually. Firstly, for actively participating in this event, and secondly, for not bunking to the sessions. If I were you, right now, I would be in Chandagiri, or in Pokhara, or in Nagarkot. That's for sure. So you deserve thanks. And during the deliberation of these 2 days, I had many valuable takeaways. I have taken note of your valuable suggestion and advice, where SARC can intervene or what can be agenda item of SARC. And I personally, I will follow it up, of course. And we already have collaboration with IFPRI. We have an agriculture center dedicated for, we have a center, regional center dedicated for agriculture, which is called SARC Agriculture Center. It has certain activities. It carries out research work too. So we'll try to find a mechanism so that we can collaborate more with IFPRI and other similar organizations. That said, I must thank IFPRI and IADS for successfully completing this event. SARC was partner of this event too, but to be honest, we were ornamental partners. It is IFPRI and IADS who actually gave the wholehearted efforts. And I must thank all officials of IFPRI and IADS for their hard work to make this event successful. I wish you a safe journey back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamal Ahmed. Thank you so much. We are sure that the SARC will actively collaborate in these kinds of activities. Will be initiated after the over of this particular program. So we have, I now honor to invite Mr. Jason Siu, who is the Director, Economic Growth Office, USAID, Nepal. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's good to be here, and it's such a pleasure to join everyone here for the launch of this important report. And I think we believe that the IFPRI Global Food Policy Report can really serve as a great resource for those engaged in Nepal's food systems in steering its transformation while helping us rethink future crisis responses. My congratulations goes to IFPRI, IEDS and its partners. And I just wanted to also thank the panelists here, government, private sector, and civil society, and all those who are helping shape these things. I think last year we gathered to talk about this report. It was focused on climate change crisis. This year on overall kind of food crisis response, and I hope in several years we can start talking about what we've done to help mitigate those crises, but we're not quite there yet. Impacts from climate change, conflict, and instability are becoming increasingly common. No government can address these global challenges alone, and we're all going to need to work together to address these, especially with the private sector and civil society, to ensure that we leverage our resources to do the most good. Now, I've been asked to talk a little bit about what USAID has done, and I'll take this time to share maybe a few examples of our responses and approaches to tackling these shocks to food security here in Nepal. USAID is continually expanding our efforts to mitigate the short and long-term impacts of shocks, recognizing that building resilience is key to development. The global economy was turned upside down with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Shortages and increased prices of fuel, fertilizer, and food were felt widely, and Nepal was not immune to these impacts, and there are specific challenges for farmers, entrepreneurs, and consumers. So to respond to this complex situation, USAID Nepal looked to achieve some quick wins while simultaneously shoring up food security and building resilience. We were able to quickly deploy funds by investing in existing programs, and as a result, today we've been able to provide 450 irrigation schemes that serve over 6,000 farmers, supplied nutrition assistance to 15,000 children and over 11,000 pregnant mothers, and we've invested in building agricultural capacity and resilience. And the ability for development partners to absorb additional funding and pivot are really critical to respond to shocks. We all must generally be able to practice adaptive and flexible management and approaches with the programs that we have so we can address the challenges that we face every day. The invasion of Ukraine came on the heels of another crisis, COVID-19. Strict lockdowns impacted the agriculture sector. The return of migrants and the decimation of the tourism sector had ripple effects on the economy. Food price inflation topped 8% in the third quarter of 2022 and increased the cost of the basic food basket by about 10% nationwide, threatening food security for the most marginalized populations. And in response, we've been able to increase investments in food security monitoring, in fact, together with IFPRI, to better understand subnational trends and to prepare for any required emergency responses. And I think luckily, Nepal has been able to avoid such food emergencies like we've seen in some other places, and I hope that we can really learn from this and look back to see how was Nepal able to be resilient when some other places were a little bit less lucky. And as we are aware, Nepal remains among the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change and natural disasters, and is already experiencing changes in temperature and precipitation at a faster rate than the global average. Surely it's been quite hot these days in Kathmandu and the Tarai and other places, and we're seeing this very, very quickly. And of course, every year millions of people are affected by disasters, and agriculture is particularly vulnerable. So in 2022, USAID has been able to improve the resilience of over 340,000 smallholder farmers by providing climate information, risk-reducing strategies, and access to technologies and innovations such as heat, drought, and flood-tolerant seed varieties. In addition, I think these are just a few of the examples of how we're responding to current crisis, but it's going to take all of us. And if we're not thinking innovatively about how to prevent, mitigate, and respond to compounding shocks, we have to ask ourselves, are we contributing to sustainable development? What difference are we all making here? So thankfully, we've had a strong partner with the government of Nepal in helping kind of set the course for sustainable development here. And last year, the United States government and the government of Nepal have commemorated 75 years of our bilateral relationship. And now today, over these 76 years, our partnership has seen many successes. As we look to the future, we will continue to explore and promote integrated interventions and approaches, partnerships that accelerate and amplify the work that we're all here to do, make Nepal more prosperous, more equitable, and more resilient. Finally, I'd like to thank IFPRI and IEDS for organizing this important event. Really enjoyed the discussions here, learned a lot, and looking forward to being able to better implement the results of these reports in the near future. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jason. Thank you so much. Now, friends, media plays a very, very important role in information dissemination and also influencing the government. So may I now request Mr. Ghanshyam Khatke from Kantipur Daily. Kantipur Daily is the leading newspaper in the country. So may I request you, Mr. Ghanshyam, give your remarks, please.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here to have few words in front of you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and its partners for organizing this wonderful dialogue on important issues of food crisis. It is said that every beginning has its end, and I believe that every end has its beginning as well. As a media person, as we are near the conclusion of this truly remarkable conference, a journalist and writer within me is brimming with a wave of inspiring ideas, having found a significant subject to delve into. The discussions we have had on the pressing issues of the growing food crisis is eye-opening. Throughout our time together, we have confronted enormous challenges that lie before us, and it has become painfully clear that urgent action is needed. The stories of communities affected by food crisis have left an indelible mark on our souls. These discussions have stirred something deep within us. They have raised our hearts, opening our eyes to be the unbearable burden of food insecurity endured by so many of us. They have ignited our minds, inspiring fresh ideas and questioning long-held beliefs, and they have stirred our spirits, untying us in a shared commitment to make a positive impact, no matter how small, in the lives of those most affected. We find ourselves at a critical juncture, a moment that demands courage, collaboration, and compassion. We can no longer hold on to outdated practices or turn a blind eye to the complexities of the crisis. Instead, we must embrace new approaches that prioritize resilience, inclusivity, and sustainability. Let us never forget that the food crisis recognizes no boundaries. It affects communities across the globe, people of all genders, races, religions, and social backgrounds. Our response must encompass everyone, guided by a collective vision of a world where no one suffers from hunger. As we bid farewell to this conference and return to our everyday lives, let us carry with us the spirit of innovation, the courage to challenge the status quo, and the willingness to collaborate across disciplines, sectors, nations, and media. Together, let us forge partnerships that transcend borders, joining hands with governments, civil society, and academia. Above all, let us always remember that behind the statistics and policies, there are real lives instinctively connected to the fate of our planet. We must listen intently to their stories, truly comprehend their needs, and empower them to become the true agents of change within our own communities. My heartfelt gratitude extends to the remarkable speakers, panelists, organizers, and participants who have generously shared their expertise, insights, and unwavering passion throughout this conference. Your tireless commitment to rethinking our response to the food crisis fills us with hope for a future that shines brightly. As we embark on this transformative journey, let us carry the essence of this conference with us, a spirit that embraces resilience, equality, and compassion. Together, we can overcome the challenges that lie ahead, rewrite the narrative surrounding the food crisis, and create a world where everyone has access to nourishment and sustainability. Thank you for this wonderful conference and your patience as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ghanshyamji, for your special remarks. Thank you so much. May I now request Dr. Jo Sunan, the Director General of International Food Policy Research Institute, who is providing a great leadership in IFPRI as well as CGIR. Please give a big hand to him for bringing out such a brilliant global food policy report and giving a direction to the world community on how to meet the food crisis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words and for being all together here. It's been, I think, a wonderful 2 days, day and a half. And as I mentioned yesterday at the beginning, this is the first time I am here since in 30 years, 31 years actually to be precise. So it's been a wonderful moment coming back, looking at Nepal, Kathmandu, walking through the streets again, what has changed, what has not changed. So I really enjoyed it to meet the people here and the country. But of course, we're not here only with people from Nepal, but from many participants from other countries in South Asia. And so I think we've experienced a fantastic program. When I first looked at it on the plane here, I was really impressed with the setup, with the panels that had been put together and the people who had been invited to speak. And I think I have not been disappointed at all. I mean, it's been wonderful just to hear the different perspectives, the different opinions from so many distinguished speakers and to hear about their views and opinions and how to address the problems that the region is facing. The topic of our global food policy report, as I'm sure you know by now, on the addressing food crisis and rethinking our response to food crisis, is in a way, unfortunately, it's very timely. Okay, and so that's what many people have told us in response to it, that it has been a very timely report in terms of coming up on the issue and the way we have used IFPRI's analyses to address the problems and coming up with very practical proposals for addressing these things for government policies, but also for private sector and NGO engagement, I think, and everybody who is involved and concerned about these things. We've had 8 panels, so a lot of speakers over the past day, so I'm happy I'm not sharing the session, having to summarize some of the things which have been said. I do want to make the further point that IFPRI has a very strong presence in the South Asia region. We have country offices in several countries here, large country offices, and of course we have our South Asia office in Delhi. We have had several meetings yesterday and today with representatives, with partners here in Nepal and with the government, and so we plan to extend our presence and our activities in Nepal. We've had an engagement going back many years, but we hope to engage to extend this further. And for the South Asia region, our engagement lies not several years, but several decades in this region. I think we have really enjoyed working with our partners and our colleagues here. Let me just end by thanking everybody involved. I have learned that a word of thank is always a tricky thing. It's not so much the people you thank, but the people you forget to thank. And so I want to thank everybody. to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody, but particularly, certainly all our partners here with whom we have worked together, the sponsors for our work, our engagement in the region, and for the 2 days here, all the speakers on, which have been on the program, then especially certainly also our colleagues from IIDS. It's been a pleasure and a very impressive collaboration, and in terms of the organization. And I definitely want to thank all the members of the IFPRI family in the region. They have done a fantastic job in the preparation as well on these things and in guiding us through the past day and a half. So thanks very much for the organization, and thanks very much all of you. I mean, I've been also impressed how full the room has been for all the panels here, and I hope this just reflects the interest in what has been said here. And so with that, thank you all, and it was great being here, and we certainly look forward to continue our collaboration with all of you and our engagement, and hopefully, as I think also the previous speaker said, we may have different themes to talk about than food crises. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sinan. So, good afternoon to everyone. It's my turn to give the remarks. So friends, it was very productive and informative panel discussions. So first of all, I would like to compliment and congratulate IFPRI as well as IIDS and BIMSTEC, SARC as well as Indian Council of Agriculture Research for organizing this launch ceremony as well as the panel discussion. It is really brilliantly organized, and all compliments goes to all the organizers. And thank you very much for bringing me here and giving me this wonderful opportunity. So friends, all of you know that in addition to the launch ceremony and this concluding session, there were 6 panel discussions. And these panel discussions were very well organized. So what I thought that, what should I say in the serious remarks? So I thought that let me conclude the takeaways. We should not abruptly go from here. So I listed 10 takeaways in next 10 minutes. So I'll just, because of paucity of time, I'll just list down these points which we were required to take further action on this particular event. The first one, it was on, the session was on monitoring. So one is that we need to develop and improve our forecasting of risk, such as weather as well as food price spikes, leading to the food crisis. So all kinds of, these risks, we need to have to forecast them so that we take action well in advance, like anticipatory actions we should take away. Here, role of GIS, GPS, drones will be very, very important for forecasting of food production especially. And then we need to improve tools for forecasting floods, earthquakes, cyclones, tsunami, etc. So we need to develop, tools are already there, but we need to improve these tools for their accuracy. The second one is disseminate the relevant information, whatever we have identified risk. So disseminate this information widely and take appropriate action. So it was discussed that we should have a platform for information dissemination. So there should be free flow of information. Third is we need to develop institutions. It was mentioned that there are very weak institutions. There are one that there are less institutions, and there are very weak institutions to manage the food crisis. So develop institutions for disaster forecasting and disaster response, both for disaster forecasting as well as disaster response. And these institutions should be at different levels, not only at the global level, but they should be at state level, regional level, as well as the local level. So fourth point is that we need to improve coordination and integration among different levels of actors. You know, when there are the crises, in those crises, the institution which is taking care of the food crisis cannot take, you know, they require lots of other ministries and other departments. So a lot of convergence and coordination is required. So the role of this institution should also be how to coordinate not only with different government machineries, institutions, NGOs, private sector, civil society organizations. So that process we need to evolve so that they can effectively work under uncertain environments. Then strengthen value chains. There's a very interesting presentation and discussion on value chain development during the crisis. So strengthen value chain through infrastructure development and also regulate value chain development during the disaster and after the disaster. So value chain development is very important for food crisis management. Sixth one is strengthen social protection program. Morning we have that particular session, very interesting session. So sequence would be, you know, in the event of the disaster, you need food in kind, and gradually you move towards the cash transfer. So from sequencing should be kind to cash, and it should not only restricted to food, but you also need, you know, medicines, water, sanitation, all these things are required in addition to the food. Seventh is Global Food Security Forum should be established. And we need to strengthen FAO's Global Forum on Food Security and Nutrition. So this is one of the points which I was mentioning yesterday also. And create a Global Food Crisis Fund. That I think we have to think on this one, more analysis and more debate should be initiated on this particular region. And we should have a global food bank, regional as well as global at the global community. And countries should also think of having strategic reserve with them. It should not only depend on the regional food bank, but countries should also have their own strategic reserve, especially for the food commodities. SARC Food Bank, we have a wonderful idea, and I think it should be a study. I was telling yesterday, we should have a study by IFPRI or someone, SARC Development Fund can give a study that why it is not working. What are the reasons? Are they political, economic, or other reasons that, or the processes which we have initiated earlier when this bank was established are not very correct. So how to resolve those issues? I think it will be very, very helpful. The two regional entities, SARC as well as BIMSTEC, should think of developing these kinds of banks in their own. These will be virtual banks, not the, we don't need the storage in respective at one place, but these will be virtual banks. And there was a very good suggestion that after the disaster is happening, so we need because the assets are being, you know, destroyed. So disaster relief loans are to be, you know, initiated at a very subsidized rates. Capacity development is another important component in managing these crises. So capacity development to meet the challenges at different levels. And we need to involve the local community, and we need to empower women and engage them in these crisis management, also capacity building from end to end. Morning, we have a very interesting session on the gender-related issues. And ninth one is strengthen science, technology, and innovation system. Many of the our guests and the panelists emphasize that we should have a strong R&D to have the increasing food security programs. So we need to strengthen the science, technology, and innovation system, and we should have a platform for free flow of information and innovation system. Someone mentioned yesterday that seeds without the regions. So from one region to another region means one country to another country, seeds can flow. But there are restrictions between governments. So how to resolve that? I think, again, a big challenge with all of us. Last is to, this is for IFPRI. So I thought that we have lots of, during these 20 years or 24 years, we have seen lots of crises, food crisis. Either it is through price spikes or through earthquakes or floods, lots of crises we have seen and which has resulted to the food crisis. So why not to document, these food crises during last 20 years, and then document the responses, what the response for those crises, how to manage those crises were taken up, and then highlight the best practices. Because, every disaster is giving lesson to us for future. So what lessons we can learn from these challenges and how we have overcome those challenges, this should be documented, and best practices will helpful for future crises, how to manage the future crisis. A document can be taken up, and we need to undertake some studies on economic and the social cost and benefits as a result of the action which we have taken. There are some anticipatory actions, some are the relief measures. So what are the economic and social benefits resulted from these response crises? And then develop a strong database so that the new techniques which are emerging, we can use those techniques for our future course of action. So these are the 10 takeaway points I thought that I will share with you during the discussion which we have done during last 2 days. I really enjoyed every moment in this workshop which we have. So thank you very much to all of you, and enjoy for this food crisis. We will have the, I think, wonderful lunch after this one, so we don't have the food crisis. So thank you very much, friends, and thanks to Dr. Said and Joe for giving me this opportunity. And now I request Dr. Mamta for giving a formal vote of thanks.
Greetings once again from International Food Policy Research Institute, esteemed panelists and esteemed participants, my colleagues and my friends. Thank you is said to be such a prayer that cannot be seen or touched. It must be felt by heart. I think I feel it in my heart, and it's a privilege to propose a vote of thanks on the completion of this special event, that's the launch of the GFPR 2023 for the South Asia region. IFPRI, along with IIDS, who has been our most constant and esteemed partner, and our co-organizers, would like to thank all the honorable delegates, specifically Dr. P.K. Joshi, Dr. Jamal Ahmed, Dr. Tyang Guru is here, our regional excellency, Mr. Tenzin Lekpil, and I think a whole host of the delegates who blessed this meeting with their presence. GFPR event on thinking crisis responses actually structurally puts restriction on us that the launch event had to be totally crisis-free. That was inherently demanding, and the team worked very hard on it. An event of this dimension does not happen overnight. Preparation started, I think, months in advance. I'm also very much thankful to all the organizing committee, the speakers, the panelists, the media personals, who have traveled from India, from Bangladesh. I think a big round of applause for them. And the spectacular journalists from the Nepal, who have been consistently with us for the past 2 days. We know that time is money, and you have all invested, very graciously spent millions in these 2 days, not in cryptocurrency. Words are not enough to thank for the special perspective on crisis responses and being prepared for the next one. GFPR is a product that is built on collective spirit of intellectual and practical engagement GFPR 2023 really provides a very, very valuable roadmap enriched by all your contributions. It's now up to us to that what is learned on crisis responses, especially on the preparedness for future, and how it is applied and how it is adopted, taking into account the regional and other local realities. Learning from crisis and rethinking responses is that brought us all together. And the biggest success will be in terms of applying and learning from this collective wisdom. We have been very fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated committee and partners from Nepal and from other countries. I would like to take this opportunity to place on record the guidance and the logistic support from the admin team and the communication Sherpas who have made this launch a success that it deserved. In GFPR launch, the scale and precision that was witnessed really involved a huge team effort, which was totally spearheaded by a very passionate leader, Dr. Shahidur Rashid, who is the Director of South Asia, our Director General, Yo Swinin, Dr. Gauchan, who is the Director General from IITS. I also want to take this moment to thank Anisha Mohan from IFPRI-South Communications. Anisha, can you please come to the front? What you pulled off, actually, what you pull off every time is truly incredible. Indeed, behind every woman's success is the woman herself. So thank you is not enough for us to express how grateful we are for your support, or rather, building and, leading this on so many fronts and the success that this event has been. I also want to put on record very specifically the exemplary support by the admin team, Nikita Verma. Can I request all the team to please come to the front? Joshna Dua, whom you're already all familiar with, Amardeep, and our incredible IISDA team, Devika and Sneha. Please, I would request everybody to please come on the front, please. And a big round of applause for this team. And the whole IISD's team who is present here, may I request all of you to please come on the front. We all had the interns who were doing notes. Please come to the front. So you all are actually the true commanders, and thanks for preserving our health while probably sacrificing a bit of yours as you slogged in this whole time. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. May I request also Devendra to please come to the front? Okay, he's a silent worker, working from behind. So thank you all, and thank you, Nepal. You should be here. You should not be invited. You are the host. Please, Shahid, come to the front. We'll have a photo, right? Come. Yeah, please. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Please be there. So I'll end my vote of thanks note by saying that I should only be breaking in launches like this GFPR and not on the monumental and beautiful mountain peaks, the majority of which lie in this beautiful country. So have a pleasant rest of your day and a pleasant journey back to those who are traveling. Thank you so much. Yeah, with this, I declare the two-day workshop to be closed. Can we have a quick photo
Recording stopped.
With the group photo, because yesterday we missed you and Shahid and Dr. Gauchan. So can we just have a group photo quickly? Can you just assemble Joshna fast, because we have to go for the press conference. May I request everybody to please come to the front.